The world knows Jackie Chan as the master of chaos, the king of death-defying stunts, the man who turned pain into punchlines and broken bones into box office gold. They see the impossible leaps, the improvised weapons, the perfectly timed comedic beats that have audiences laughing 1 second and gasping the next. But what they don't know is that every spectacular moment of controlled mayhem, every split-second decision that saved his life on camera, every pause that turned violence into comedy gold, all began with the quiet click of a wooden metronome in a dusty Hong Kong training hall at 4 o'clock in the morning in 1969. In late 1969, when kung fu films were just beginning to captivate global audiences, there existed a man whose name appears in no film credits, whose face graces no movie posters, but whose influence would quietly reshape action cinema forever. Master Chen Wei-ming was not a martial arts legend. He was a rhythm coach, a timing specialist who understood something that had escaped every other trainer in Hong Kong: that the difference between life and death, between comedy and tragedy, between stunning success and catastrophic failure, could be measured in fractions of seconds. Chen was 47 years old, a thin man with calloused hands and eyes that seemed to count beats even when speaking. His world consisted of wooden floors, measured breathing, and a single handcrafted metronome carved from Chinese elm decades earlier by master craftsmen. While other instructors focused on strength, speed, and technique, Chen understood that timing was the invisible foundation upon which all great performance was built. He knew that a pause could be more powerful than a strike, that rhythm could control an audience more effectively than violence, and that the space between actions was often more important than the actions themselves. But finding someone who could understand these concepts was proving nearly impossible. Most students wanted to fight harder, kick higher, move faster. They had no patience for the seemingly mystical concept of perfect timing. They couldn't comprehend why Chen would make them repeat a simple step and pause sequence for hours without explanation, growing frustrated with exercises that seemed disconnected from practical combat application. Then came Jackie Chan, or rather, Chan Kong-sang, a 17-year-old student at the China Drama Academy who possessed something Chen had searched for his entire career: an intuitive understanding that movement was communication. Jackie had already shown remarkable ability in traditional forms and acrobatic sequences. His flexibility was extraordinary, his courage legendary among students, and his willingness to attempt dangerous techniques others avoided had earned him recognition. But Chen saw something else in Jackie, something other teachers had missed or dismissed as unimportant. Jackie moved with internal rhythm, naturally synchronized to something deeper than physical training. When he performed sequences, there was musicality suggesting he understood intuitively that fighting was storytelling, that every gesture needed to serve a larger narrative purpose. Most importantly, Jackie showed flashes of something Chen had never seen in a martial artist: the ability to make deliberate pauses that somehow increased tension rather than releasing it. Chen had watched Jackie for weeks before approaching him. Every morning at 4 a.m., when halls were empty, Chen would arrive with his wooden metronome and spend 2 hours working on timing exercises alone. These sessions were private, personal, having nothing to do with his official duties. But one November morning in 1969, Jackie appeared in the doorway, mysteriously drawn by the steady clicking that had echoed through the building for weeks. What happened next would become the foundation of Jackie's revolutionary approach to action cinema, though neither master nor student realized they were creating something that would influence filmmakers for decades. Chen looked at Jackie standing in the doorway and simply said, "If you want to understand what I'm doing, you have to forget everything you think you know about fighting." Jackie entered and saw Chen sitting cross-legged, the metronome positioned between them like a sacred object. The room was completely empty, except for them and the steady, hypnotic clicking that seemed to measure not just time, but something fundamental about movement itself. Chen gestured for Jackie to sit opposite him and began the most important lesson of the young man's life. "Speed is not timing," Chen said quietly, his voice barely audible above the metronome's steady beat. "Power is not timing. Technique is not timing. Timing is the pause between your intention and your action. It is the breath you take before you strike. It is the moment of stillness that makes everything else possible. He demonstrated by moving his hand toward the metronome, but instead of touching it immediately, he held his hand suspended just above the wooden surface for exactly 1 beat. Then, on the next click, he gently tapped the device. The simple gesture somehow felt more powerful, more deliberate, more controlled than any violent movement Jackie had witnessed. The metronome is not counting time, Chen continued. It is creating space. Each click opens a pocket of possibility. Your job is to learn to live inside those pockets, to make decisions in the pause, to find power in the moment between moments. He had Jackie begin with the most basic exercise, standing up and sitting down in sync with the metronome's beat. Not faster, not slower, but perfectly aligned. What seemed simple proved extraordinarily difficult. Jackie's natural instinct was to move quickly, to demonstrate physical capabilities, to impress his teacher with speed and agility. But Chen wanted something entirely different. He wanted Jackie to discover that true control meant being able to move slowly when everything in your body wanted to move quickly. Hour after hour, day after day, Chen had Jackie repeat the same basic exercise until the young man began to understand that he was not learning to fight. He was learning to think. The breakthrough came 3 weeks into their private morning sessions. Jackie was working on a complex sequence combining a forward roll, a pause in a crouch position, and then a spring into standing. He had performed it dozens of times, but something felt disconnected, mechanical, like 3 separate actions rather than one fluid expression of controlled energy. Chen stopped the metronome. The sudden silence was almost startling after weeks of constant clicking. "What are you trying to accomplish with this sequence?" he asked. "Show me what story you're telling." Jackie looked confused. He was learning martial arts, not storytelling. But Chen insisted. "Every movement tells a story. Your roll says something. Your pause says something. Your spring says something. But right now, they are telling 3 different stories. Make them tell one story." Jackie began again, but this time, instead of thinking about technical requirements, he tried to imagine what narrative he was expressing. The roll became an evasion of danger. The pause became assessment, gathering information. The spring became decisive action based on that assessment. Suddenly, the 3 movements felt like chapters in the same book, connected by an invisible thread of intention. Chen restarted the metronome at a slower tempo. "Now," he said, "tell the same story, but make the audience wait longer for the conclusion. Make them wonder what you are thinking during the pause. Make them worry about what you might do next." This was the moment that would define Jackie's entire career. As he performed the sequence with extended pauses, he discovered that audience attention was most focused not during action, but during moments of stillness. The pause was not empty space to be minimized. It was dramatic real estate to be maximized. Over the following months, Chen taught Jackie concepts that existed nowhere in traditional martial arts training. He taught him about rhythm versus tempo, explaining that rhythm was the internal pulse driving all movement, while tempo was simply the speed at which that pulse was expressed. He demonstrated how changing tempo could change emotional impact of the same sequence, how a slow, deliberate movement could be more intimidating than a fast, aggressive one. Chen introduced Jackie to syncopation, showing him how deliberately going slightly off beat could create tension and surprise. He taught him about the power of the upbeat, the moment just before expected action that could be used to misdirect an opponent's attention or set up an unexpected comedic reversal. Most importantly, he taught Jackie that timing was not just about his own movements, but about reading and responding to the rhythms of everyone else in the scene. "When you fight multiple opponents," Chen explained, "you are not fighting their fists. You are fighting their timing. If you can disrupt their rhythm, if you can make them move to your beat instead of their own, you have won before the first punch is thrown." But the most revolutionary concept Chen taught was that comedy and combat operated on exactly the same principles. The setup and the punchline, he explained, are the same as the feint and the strike. Both depend on creating expectation and then subverting it at precisely the right moment. Both require the audience to be emotionally invested in one outcome, so they can be surprised by a different outcome. Both live or die based on timing. As their training relationship deepened, Chen began sharing the philosophical foundations underpinning his approach. He had spent decades studying not just martial arts, but the fundamental nature of human attention and perception. He understood that audiences, whether watching a live performance or a film, had predictable attention patterns that could be manipulated through careful timing. Human beings, Chen explained, have a natural rhythm to their attention. They focus intensely for a certain period, then their attention begins to wander. If you understand this rhythm, you can structure your performance to deliver the most important moments precisely when the audience is most receptive. This concept would prove revolutionary when Jackie eventually began creating his own action sequences. Instead of trying to maintain constant high-intensity action, he learned to create waves of tension and release that matched natural rhythms of human attention. His famous action scenes would feature moments of apparent calm that actually served to reset the audience's attention and prepare them for the next intense sequence. The moment that would define everything came in late 1970, almost a year after Jackie had first encountered Chen's metronome. Jackie was working on a complex sequence combining traditional martial arts techniques with acrobatic elements and comedic timing. The sequence required him to dodge an attack, use his opponent's momentum against them, and then find himself in an unexpectedly humorous position without breaking the fight's flow. For weeks, Jackie had struggled with the transition between martial arts elements and comedic elements. The timing that worked for effective fighting seemed to destroy the comedy, while timing that made humor work made fighting look fake and ineffective. Chen watched him struggle with growing interest, recognizing that Jackie was encountering the fundamental challenge that would define his entire career: how to be simultaneously authentic and entertaining. Finally, Chen stopped the session. "The problem," he said, "is that you are thinking of comedy and combat as different things that require different timing. But they are the same thing. They are both about controlling expectation and delivering surprise. The only difference is the type of surprise you deliver." He had Jackie perform the sequence again, but this time, instead of trying to switch between fighting mode and comedy mode, Chen instructed him to maintain exactly the same internal rhythm throughout, regardless of whether the moment was meant to be dramatic or humorous. The result was magical. Suddenly, the fighting looked more real because it maintained the same human rhythm as the comedy. And the comedy looked more genuine because it emerged naturally from the same timing structure as the combat. Jackie had discovered what would become his signature approach: action comedy, that worked because the comedy enhanced the action rather than interrupting it. Through 1971 and 1972, as Jackie began his professional film career, he continued early morning sessions with Chen. But now, instead of basic timing exercises, they developed specific techniques that would define Jackie's screen persona. Chen helped Jackie understand how film timing differed from stage timing, how the camera's presence changed rhythm requirements. On stage, Chen explained, "You are performing for an audience that can choose where to look. On camera, the audience sees only what the camera shows them. This means you can use much more subtle timing cues, but it also means that every gesture must be precisely calculated because there is nowhere to hide." Chen also helped Jackie develop what would become his most famous innovation: the outtake sequence. Chen understood that audiences were fascinated by the process of creation, by seeing how difficult moments were achieved. "When people see how many times you had to attempt something," Chen told him, "they understand how difficult it really was. The failures make the successes more impressive, not less impressive." In 1973, Chen Wei-ming quietly left Hong Kong. He never explained where he was going or why. He simply appeared in Jackie's training room one final morning, handed him the wooden metronome, and said, "You understand now that the click is not the sound. The click is the space between the sounds. Take care of that space." Jackie never saw his teacher again. Years later, when Jackie had become an international star and journalists asked about his training, he would mention a timing coach who had influenced his approach to action sequences. But he could never adequately explain what Chen had taught him, because the lessons were not about technique or philosophy. They were about developing an internal sense of rhythm that operated below the level of conscious thought. Chen Wei-ming's influence on modern action cinema extends far beyond Jackie Chan's individual career. The timing principles Chen taught were absorbed by every stunt coordinator, director, and action choreographer who worked with Jackie over the years. They spread through the Hong Kong film industry like invisible seeds, germinating in the work of other action stars who learned from Jackie's example without understanding its theoretical foundation. When Jackie eventually began mentoring younger performers, he found himself unconsciously passing on Chen's lessons. He would teach young stunt performers about the importance of pause, about reading the rhythm of a scene, about using timing to control audience attention. Most of these students never knew they were learning techniques that originated with a quiet man and his wooden metronome decades earlier. The influence expanded when Hollywood began studying Jackie's action style in the 1980s and 1990s. American action directors, trying to understand what made Jackie's sequences so compelling, began incorporating longer takes, more complex timing, and greater attention to rhythm in their own work. They were copying the surface manifestations of Chen's deeper teachings without understanding the theoretical framework. Jackie Chan's career eventually took him far from the dusty practice rooms where he first learned to count beats with a wooden metronome. He became an international superstar, a cultural ambassador, a filmmaker whose influence extended into every corner of the entertainment world. But throughout his journey, the lessons Chen Wei-ming taught him remained constant. That timing is invisible, but fundamental. That pause is active rather than passive. That rhythm is the hidden language through which performers communicate with their audiences. The metronome itself, now carefully preserved in Jackie's private collection, no longer clicks with mechanical regularity. Its wooden mechanism has grown silent with age, but its purpose has been fulfilled. It served not as a permanent crutch, but as a temporary teacher, helping Jackie develop an internal sense of timing that would last his entire career. In the end, Chen Wei-ming's revolution was not about changing how action films are made, though that certainly happened. It was about proving that the most spectacular achievements are built on the most fundamental principles, that complexity emerges from simplicity, that the invisible elements of performance are often more important than the visible ones. He took a teenage martial arts student and taught him to think like a musician, to move like a poet, to fight like a dancer, and to make all of it look effortlessly natural. The wooden metronome's final click echoed not in a practice room, but in every perfectly timed moment of Jackie Chan's career, in every pause that preceded a punchline, in every breath taken before a leap that should have been impossible. Chen Wei-ming had taught Jackie to control time itself, and through Jackie, he had changed the very language of action cinema forever.